The apostolic churches, the pillar and ground of all truth, are the sole depository of the authentic apostolic writings. The words of Irenaeus. Since there are so many clear testimonies, we should not seek from others for the truth which can be easily received from the church. There the apostles, like a rich man making a deposit, fully bestowed upon her all that belongs to the truth, so that whoever wishes may receive from her the water of life. She is the entrance to life. All the others are thieves and robbers. What if there should be a dispute about some matter of moderate importance? Should we not turn to the oldest churches, where the apostles themselves were known, and find out from them the clear and certain answer to the problem now being raised? Even if the apostles had not left their writings to us, ought we not follow the rule of the tradition which they handed down to those to whom they committed the churches? Irenaeus' testimony strikes at the heart of the matter central to our debate with Bart Erhman, James White and Daniel Wallace. For who is in the best position to give an accurate witness account to the authentic writings of the New Testament? Are not the historic apostolic institutions that received these writings and have a legal chain of custody of these documents the most reliable outlet and resource? Doesn't Tertullian also attest to this clear precedent against the Gnostics when he proclaims, "Run over to the apostolic churches, in which the very thrones of the apostles are still preeminent in their place, in which their own authentic writings are read." And in matters of dispute as chronicled in the case of Pope Boniface's rejection of St. John's Apocalypse, ought we not follow the example of the North African churches at the Council of Carthage, who invaded Rome's claims by appealing to antiquity to authenticate the Apocalypse of St. John as a received text that has been handed down through the churches of North Africa? For the historical apostolic churches all bear witness to this text, which Tertullian clearly demonstrates in his treatise against Marcion, stating, "For although Marcion rejects the Apocalypse of John, we have St. John's foster churches, and the order of the bishops thereof, when traced up to their origin, will yet rest on John as their author." For the Council of Carthage's official response to Rome testifies to this criterion, as declared in its canons, which states, "Let this be sent to our brother and fellow Bishop Boniface, and to the other bishops of those parts, that they may confirm this canon. For these are the things which we have received from our fathers, to be read in church." Thus, treating the Pope of Rome like a child at confirmation. As evidenced in the writings of Irenaeus and Tertullian, formal legal voices in the 2nd century, only texts that have a legal chain of custody to the apostles that were commonly received through the historical churches were counted as the official texts of the church. We can also establish confirmation of this historical legal requirement for the text of the New Testament down through the ages. As recorded in the Church of England's 1562 Articles of Religion, which clearly affirms all the books of the New Testament, as they are commonly received, we do receive and account them canonical. Therefore, shouldn't we, as an underlying core principle, establish our textual scholarship on texts that have a legal chain of custody to the Apostolic, Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Aramaic, Ethiopian, and Western churches? For the textual scholars of the Renaissance all held to this apostolic criterion, and based their editions on the ecclesiastical texts that have come through the apostolic churches. These scholars include dignitaries such as Cardinal Jimenez of Toledo, Erasmus of Rotterdam, Theodore Beza of Geneva, Robertus Stephanus of Paris, and the 47 architects of the Authorized Version of 1611. Yet, the textual scholarship of Bart Erhman, James White, and Daniel Wallace is founded on an entirely different set of assumptions, using an alternative set of manuscripts and applying a technique that can be at best described as clairvoyant in nature. Though it is common for these scholars to begin their examination by pointing to the overwhelming testimony of manuscript evidence that is available for the New Testament, citing over 24,000 copies in the primary languages of Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and Egyptian, this is mere sleight of hand. because their greatest illusion is concealing from their audiences the fact that they actually reject almost all of this evidence. What these scholars don't want you to know is that they have labeled all of the historical texts from the apostolic churches as corrupt, disqualifying these New Testament documents from their research. This comes as no surprise, since Bart, James, and Daniel's underlying core positions are grounded in the teachings and methods of Bruce Metzger, whose own published work, titled The Text of the New Testament, Its Transmission, Corruption, and Restoration, leaves no doubt to their essential core beliefs. Now, this naturally begs the question: if they are not using the official texts of the historic apostolic churches for their textual analysis, what texts are they using? Here, the great mystery is revealed. For the foundation of their scholarship rests upon a handful of apocryphal texts that they deem to be the best and earliest. In describing these texts as the best and earliest, Bart, James, and Daniel assert what must first be proven. Since the provenance of these texts is unknown, and these documents cannot be shown to have ever been used by the apostolic churches, we summon Bart, James, and Daniel to establish the legal chain of custody for these texts they are introducing into evidence. What prosecutor does not first establish this requirement in submitting evidence before the court? Does not evidence have to demonstrate its association to the scene of the crime? Evidence of this kind would never be allowed at trial. Yet Bart, James, and Daniel introduce these textual witnesses, ignoring common rules of evidence consistent in any court of law. And since these texts cannot establish a legal chain of custody to the apostolic churches, the antiquity of these documents arouses further suspicion. The writings of Tertullian, Irenaeus, and Caius, all 2nd century witnesses, testify to the existence of texts not received by the apostolic churches that the Gnostics set out to establish as the official writings of the apostles. Nevertheless, the textual scholarship of Bart, James, and Daniel fails to heed the words of Irenaeus concerning the Gnostic texts, declaring, "They adduce an unspeakable number of apocryphal and spurious writings, which they themselves have forged, to bewilder the minds of foolish men, and of such as are ignorant of the scriptures of truth." Let's not forget that the textual scholars of the Renaissance were well aware of these apocryphal texts that Bart, James, and Daniel deemed the best and earliest. Cardinal Jimenez searched for the best and most accurate manuscripts during the production of his Complutensian Polyglot Bible. Although his first stop was the Vatican Library, where Bart, James, and Daniel's precious text, Vaticanus, was already catalogued, Cardinal Jimenez did not use this text, or any of the other texts Bart, James, and Daniel tout as the most accurate. Instead, Cardinal Jimenez used text commonly received through the apostolic churches. Equally, Erasmus of Rotterdam received over 356 readings from the text of Vaticanus, which was sent by Sepulveda and differed from the ecclesiastical texts of the apostolic churches. However, these readings never made it into Erasmus's 5th edition, and let the record show that the infamous Codex Beza, a text championed by Bart, James, and Daniel, was owned by the reformer Theodore Beza himself, who did not equate this text with the commonly received texts of the apostolic churches. Beza's own words in his letter to Cambridge details the very nature of this text, declaring it had lain in the monastery for ages, neglected and covered with dust. It is laughable that Bart, James, and Daniel would have us all believe that these texts of unknown origin, that have no legal chain of custody to any apostolic church, that were known to the Renaissance scholars, yet rejected, and that have been neglected, collecting dust in monasteries, are more faithful witnesses than the thousands of texts that have come through the apostolic churches, and have been guarded by the succession of bishops Are these apocryphal texts really the foundation of Bart, James, and Daniel's textual examination? Here is where their scholarship takes a turn toward absurdity. Bart, James, and Daniel would have us fooled into believing that these texts are the be-all and end-all. Yet, as soon as these texts invalidate their individually held convictions, they reject them as well. When the oldest collection of Paul's writings, found in PS 46, includes the letter to the Hebrews, did Bart, James, and Daniel then recognize Paul as the author? Don't bet on it. Or when their so-called best manuscripts, Vaticanus, PS 66, and PS 75, agree with the text of the apostolic churches on the passage of John 7:8, why does Daniel Wallace then reject his own texts for an alternative reading? This is because these apocryphal texts of theirs only serve as a pretext for rejecting the texts of the apostolic churches, which then sets up Bart, James, and Daniel as experts, allowing them to create their very own Bible buffet. For only those with the gnosis like Bart, James, and Daniel can ascertain the original writings of the New Testament, a tune once sung by the Gnostic Marcion in the 2nd century. This method of textual criticism, which these scholars bring forth, is a journey into the dark arts, relying on subjective principles that are strikingly different than the empirical study of the Renaissance scholars. We therefore bring forth before this court of law the charge of Gnosticism against Bart, James, and Daniel for claiming to have a secret and hidden knowledge on the texts of the New Testament. How do you, Bart, James, and Daniel, plead to these charges? We are waiting for your response.